Hello, I'm Bree Walker, coming to you from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. We're here to examine the economic meltdown. And with us is independent candidate for president, Ralph Nader. Ralph, you're known as a car guy. So why the foray into the Wall Street debacle? I mean, a lot of experts have their heads wrapped around this. Why you?
Well, before I was known as a car guy, I was known as a corporate crime enforcement guy. And I've always, since I was young, very concerned about the corporate excessive influence over our government, going back decades, the robber barons, the late 19th century. And I don't think we've ever seen anything as bad as this. This is a real takeover of the U.S. Treasury, of the White House, the Pentagon, almost every department and agency. Now they want a $700 billion bailout without any congressional hearings exploring all these things and seeing, A, is it necessary? B, if it is necessary, what kind? Who's going to benefit? Is it going to be the small investor or the fat cat speculators in Wall Street? It's a power grab of historic proportions. And I think it involves the White House trying to rip up the Constitution from Congress, take away its authority, put it in the White House so they can do whatever they want with $700 billion of taxpayers' money.
There's some history here. If you look at the S&L situation through the 80s, this is, on a much larger scale, similar.
Much larger. It's not only similar, but it's massively bigger in all kinds of ways. The S&L bailout involved a lot of hearings. There was deliberation. This is like a, ram it through, quick, before you adjourn and go back home for the elections. And it's very dictatorial, very, very dictatorial.
Do you think the American public will stand for this?
Well, the signs are that they're getting upset, and regardless of their political persuasions, they're starting to march. They're calling into C-SPAN. They're calling into talk radio. I know I was recently up on Capitol Hill, and they're getting thousands of emails. I think it really is a test. Are members of Congress going to be more afraid of the people when they go back home, or more afraid of the corporations and their political allies in the White House? If it's the former, there's not going to be this blank check for $700 billion. The government is going to support any part of the economy. It should support FDIC and all the other insurance agencies that's set up by the U.S. government to protect the small savers, the small depositors, the small investors. These are the prudent people who are now at risk. You save the prudent people before you spend $700 billion trying to bail out the giant investment banks and insurance companies in this country.
Have the Democrats a better plan for this bailout than the Republicans, or are they both so flawed they can't possibly fly?
Well, Democrats may have a better plan among the better Democrats, but it's not going to overcome Bush's stubbornness. And he's backed by Wall Street power, and the Treasury Department is run by a former Goldman Sachs head in Wall Street. And, it's not going to, it's either going to go through the way Bush wants it with a little curlicues and a couple of reporting requirements, maybe a little phony cap on executive compensation. But it's not going to go through with real taxpayer participation to recover if these companies become profitable. They can recover what the taxpayers' investment and maybe then some. I don't think that's going to go through. And definitely they're not going to have comprehensive re-regulation of the financial industry. And it was deregulation under Clinton in 1999 that started this open sesame, anything goes with other people's money.
If what's being proposed is a true compromise in Congress between Republicans and Democrats, isn't it the right thing to go ahead and do something right now?
Well, that's like saying, don't we have to bail out the people who created the problem? We don't have to bail them out. We have to support the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which guarantees the first $100,000 of people's savings in bank after bank. There's something called the SPIC that supports people's investments if they're in a brokerage firm, and the brokerage firm is so reckless that it dissipates their investment. All of these are underfunded. So any bailout plan should protect the prudent and the safe investors who are at risk because of the crooks and the speculators. You don't start at the other end and try to bail out the speculators. And if you're going to bail out anybody, you have to have comprehensive regulation so it never happens again. You have to have taxpayer participation so taxpayer can get paid back in case these companies recover. You got to have full disclosure, and you got to have more power to the shareholders to control the company and the bosses of the company they own. If shareholders like mutual funds and pension funds had that kind of authority, which they don't have now, these bosses would never have gotten away with destabilizing and tanking their own company to elevate their own bonuses and huge compensation packages.
How much of the conversation about no one could have seen this coming do you, Ralph Nader, believe?
Well, I saw it coming. A lot of people saw it coming years ago. I fought financial deregulation in 1998, 99, precisely because I predicted this is what would happen. I warned the FDIC that they weren't assessing the banks for enough money in case banks failed, and they had to guarantee deposits up to $100,000 in 1996, in 2005, and just this last July. And they weren't assessing the banks in the good times. Now they're going to run out of money, and they're going to have to call on the taxpayer rather than the banks to supplement their insurance budget. We've predicted this all along, but you know, in Washington, D.C., if you're right, you're ignored. If you're wrong, you might get a syndicated radio show.
So if we're stuck where we have to do something, what do we do?
First, we slow down. We have comprehensive congressional hearings, so we get the best advice. There are people in Wall Street I've talked to said this is not the way they would do it. They would inject capital and have a taxpayer participation. They wouldn't take all the distressed assets, which nobody knows how to evaluate, and they may be worth pennies now, and have the U.S. Treasury pay above market prices for them and break the bank and not have enough money to do what is needed to be done for the prudent savers, like funding the FDIC. So all of these and other ideas are all percolating, but they're shut out of Congress because Bush wants the Congress to give him everything he wants, blank check, shut up, and go back and run for re-election. This is a dictator we have here. This is a monarch. This is King George IV. This is the most impeachable president in modern history. This is the president that criminally got us into the Iraq War. This is the president that didn't know what to do after Katrina. This is a bunch of gangsters who've hijacked our federal government out of the White House. And why do we expect them, with their corporate buddies in Wall Street, to do anything that would help the average worker, the average small investor, and the average taxpayer? So that's why we've got to slow it down and have all the various ideas and proposals in the context of marches and demonstrations and protests by millions of people around the country, because if they don't demand a say, they're going to pay, and pay.
Is this what it looks like when a free market fails?
Yeah, when it doesn't have law and order. This is what happens when it doesn't have federal cops on the corporate crime and fraud beat. And that's what's happened throughout history, because greed is infinite. And if you don't have boundaries, if you don't have standards, if you don't have stop signs, if you don't have caution signs, if you don't have law and order, it's going to go off the deep end because the few will take the many and exploit them and try to jump into a golden rowboat just before the ship sinks, otherwise known as golden parachutes.
How do we break the stranglehold on corporate mainstream media so that messages like yours, voices like yours, that are for the average citizen can be seen and heard?
You got me. I've been right on this again and again, in writing, in testimony, in speeches in Washington. The reporters know it. The networks know it. They never have me on. I have to go on comedy shows.
If it's more regulation that we need, that's a lot more rules and financial doublespeak, right? Is there a model, a template out there for that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Some of it comes from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which they dismantled in the Clinton administration. There used to be a law called Glass-Steagall Act. It's worked very well. It basically says you're either a commercial banker or you're just a regular, conventional banker. You don't get people's money and be able to use it with your securities work. There's a conflict of interest there. The two don't mix. Well, Clinton got rid of Glass-Steagall under the influence of Robin Rubin, who then went to Citigroup and made $40 million after he left the Treasury in 4 months of consulting, right after the bill passed. What a coincidence. And as a result, they could do anything. They could take your money in the insurance premiums. They could take them in deposit. They could take it in your mortgage payments. They could take it in other kinds of loans and so on. Mix it all up and get it invest in very risky, what they call collateralized debt obligations. Very few people understand. And kaboom, the thing can go. Speaking of kaboom, what's happening today is capitalism is being bailed out by socialism. And that's why it always can be reckless, because it knows that it can always call on Uncle Sam to save it. And the free market ideology of these corporate capitalists is crumbling, but without any shame. They're now saying, hey, folks, you're all going to get hurt. All you little people are going to get hurt. So we got to be bailed out by your tax dollars in Washington. This is really offensive to people. This has really got down to their sense of gross greed and lack of fairness. And that's why they're beginning, the rumble is beginning around the country. And everybody should know, the louder the rumble, the more the members of Congress that fear you, the people, than the corporations and their lobbyists in Washington and Wall Street. The more they fear you, the better they're going to stand with you.
And hey, where's my health care?
Yeah, for starters. You want a second opinion? A first opinion. An opinion that you'll like. Go to votenader.org.